Neighbourhoods Week. Can I start? Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everyone sitting here with us tonight in the Oostserre. And good evening or good day to everyone who is or who will be watching us from home. Tonight is a pleasure to welcome the Resilient Neighbourhoods Week as part of the public programs for one evening. During the whole week, as many of you already know, several events are taking place. Events started yesterday and they will go through until Thursday, the 30th of October. Without further ado, I'm going to give the word to Professor Caroline Newton, who will introduce us to our panelists today. Today we have the pleasure of actually hosting three people from outside the faculty. I think that's also quite relevant. It doesn't happen that often. We cannot make so many people happen, so it is especially somehow joy to have so many people visiting us from outside the walls of our faculty. So, Caroline, I give you the word. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Caroline will introduce you now. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Javier. Welcome, everyone, also from my side, in this session where we want to look at governance for resilient neighborhoods. So the whole week is structured around resilient neighborhoods, looking at it from different angles. And today we want to, or this evening, we want to focus a bit more on the governance of resilient neighborhoods. And I'm very happy to have a very nice panel for you this evening. And let me first explain a bit what we will be doing. So first I'll introduce each of our panelists, and then I will ask each of the panelists to pitch their ideas or a position or a point that they want to make in relation to this topic. And while doing that, you will also discover a bit more about themselves. But so, on my left side is Nikki Franciscaki, and she's the chair professor of regional and metropolitan governance and planning in the section of spatial planning geosciences faculty at Utrecht University. Her expertise is in urban transitions and transformations, their governance and planning, with a focus on achieving climate change adaptation and mitigation, sustainability and resilience. Her research also focuses on the governance and planning of nature-based solutions for contributing to climate change resilience and more just urban futures. She's actively contributing as an author in Geo5, Geo6, UCCRN Special Report on Nature-Based Solutions in Cities, IBES Transformative Change Assessment as a lead contributor, and in the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Cities as a lead author. Next to Nikki is Mustafa Essouien, and he is an housing activist rooted in the city of Rotterdam, where the echoes of the demolished Tweebosbuurt still shape his fight for justice. As a former resident of that neighborhood, their struggle is a story of loss turned into resistance. He is one of the founding members of Right to the City, a coalition of neighborhood groups uniting the demand housing justice and of woonopstand. The Housing Revolt, coalition of housing action groups and housing demonstrations. Mustafa is also active in the Bond Precaire Woonvormen, or a union for people that live in precarious housing situations. The Tweebos Residence Group, and he is a member of the Afrikaanderwijk wijkcoöperatie. Mustafa writes about housing justice, radical love, and radical participation. I'm really curious to hear more about that. And with his speeches and actions, he gives a voice to people that are not listened to, such as the unhoused, the undocumented, and all those made invisible by gentrification. Through his writing and organizing, he reclaims space, not just in the city, but in the collective imagination of what a just home can be. Next to Mustafa, we have Sanne van Manen, and she's one of the initiators of Platform Woonopgave, which was established in 2023. In addition, she runs her own design practice, Studio Meent, which focuses on social and collective design challenges in the fields of architecture, urban planning, and participation. She also teaches at the Academie van Bouwkunst in Rotterdam and serves as the chair of the foundation Platform Wederopbouw Rotterdam. Platform Woonopgave is a growing collective of architects, urban planners, developers, builders, policymakers, local authorities, and anyone who is concerned about the current housing crisis. The platform seeks alternative solutions to the housing crisis that are affordable, sustainable, and future-proof. And then, all the way on the other side is my colleague, Anneloes Nillesen. And she is the founding director of the urban design firm De Facto in Rotterdam and a professor of urban design here at our faculty. She specializes in research and design in the domain of urban and nature-based climate adaptation and flood risk management. And she worked in the Netherlands, in Bangladesh, in the Mekong Delta, and developed many urban adaptation strategies for cities such as Khulna and Dhaka in Bangladesh, Kigali in Rwanda, Houston in the US, but also in Amsterdam, The Hague, and Rotterdam. So, as you see, we have a very interesting panel for you, very different places where their focus will take us. So I would first like to invite Mustafa to give his pitch.
Is this working? Yeah. Thank you so much. Good afternoon to you all. Thanks for the invite. Happy to be here. So my name is Mustafa Essaouian. I'm a resident from the Tweebosbuurt. This is in the district of the Afrikanerwijk in Rotterdam, a neighborhood that has been demolished for several years ago. And the title of my talk is Resilience is not a buzzword, it's a struggle for justice. But first, I want to begin by saying something that may be uncomfortable to hear. Because we cannot talk about resilience in our neighborhoods without first speaking honestly about power, about pain, about injustice. We live in a time where the word resilience has become fashionable. It's printed on reports, echoed in government speeches, written on funding proposals, but often it's used in a way that empties it of its real meaning. Resilience has become a buzzword, a trendy label for shallow interventions that do not touch the root causes of suffering in our communities. So let us reclaim the word resilience. Because real resilience is not about bouncing back. It's about pushing forward. It's not about adapting to broken systems. It's about transforming them. Let me tell you what resilience looks like in Rotterdam. It looks like the Wijkbond. Local residents in our neighborhoods like the Afrikanerwijk coming together not because someone told them to, not because there was a project or campaign, but because they could not longer wait for justice. They are organizing, listening to one another, educating themselves and others, building power, refusing to be reduced to target groups or to statistics or to temporary pilot projects. We are not passive recipients of policy. We are the policy makers. We do not ask, we demand. We are not engaged by outsiders. We are already engaged in a daily battle for dignity. We want to build autonomy and be ready when we fight against gentrification. But what are we up against? Because let us not be naive. We are up against a political economic system that is short-sighted, deliberately disconnected, and fundamentally unjust. Government after government focuses on the short-term, 4-year cycles, quick wins, headline-grabbing announcements, while the deep wounds of the community go untreated. They propose resilience without confronting structural racism and discrimination, housing displacement, and poverty, and climate injustice, and so on. And meanwhile, they ask, why don't people trust us? But let me flip the question. Why does the government not trust its own people? Why are communities constantly treated as problems to be managed rather as partners to be empowered? Why are people who know the neighborhood, who have lived there for generations, who have survived neglect and exclusion, why are their voices silenced while so-called experts, mostly white men, parachute in to tell them how to fix what they never broke. This is what I mean when I say we need systemic change, because all of our struggles, yes, all, are interconnected. You cannot talk about housing without talking about institutional discrimination and racism. You cannot talk about climate justice without addressing the fact that poor and migrant communities are always first to be hit and last to be protected. You cannot talk about poverty without understanding how the economy is designed to concentrate wealth and discard the rest. And yet, so often our governments try to divide these issues. They treat them like isolated problems, but our lives are not isolated. We are suffering, our suffering is interconnected, and so must our resistance be. In Rotterdam, we now have proof of what many residents already knew in their bones. A research team of Erasmus University analyzed the housing policy and found it to be racist. So let that sink in. That is not just a finding, it's a mirror held up to our society. The policies are racist. The systems are discriminatory. And yet, somehow, the people suffering under these policies are the ones who get blamed. They are told to be more resilient, to work harder, to integrate better, to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, even when they have been denied the boots in the first place. So let us say it loud and clear. We must stop blaming the victims and start holding the system and thus the policies accountable. We must dismantle the narrative that says poor people are poor because they are lazy, marginalized because they are unwilling, or excluded because they are different. These are lies, dangerous, violent lies. Not doing something against homelessness and poverty and still blaming the homeless people and people who are poor is an act of violence. At the Wijkbond, we are fighting for long-term thinking rooted in justice, solidarity, and community wisdom. We are showing that residents are not only resilient, they are innovators and visionaries. We are building structures where local people are not asked for feedback after the decisions are already made. We are at the seat at the table, co-deciding, co-leading, and co-owning the process. So let me be clear, this is not easy work. Building real resilience means confronting uncomfortable truths. It means challenging powerful interests. It means resisting the urge for quick fixes and choosing the hard path for transformation. It means radical inclusion, bringing in the voices that are never heard, like undocumented people, labor migrants who are exploited, youth who are criminalized before they are listened to. It means valuing lived experience as much as academic credentials. It means radical equality as we do in our own district cooperative, where everyone is valued the same and gets paid the same, no matter what the background is. People with a university degree are valued the same as people with no education. As someone said about a person with so much experience and street wisdom, the university went through that person and not the other way around. So I say to you clear, we refuse to give up. We refuse to anyone to be disposable and excluded. Let us not be pacified by buzzwords, and let us not be distracted by shallow and solutions. Let us root our resilience in justice. Let us root our community power in truth. And let us build neighborhood units not just for the next crisis, but for the next generation. Let us build neighborhoods not just to survive, but to thrive with dignity, democracy, and determination. Because the neighborhoods, yes, the neighborhoods are the path forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for, I think, very powerful, very clear statement and call. Sanna, I would like to give the floor to you.
Go after. Let me see if this, yes, it works. So I'm from the platform housing. Maybe it's even better translated as platform housing challenge. And indeed, what was already mentioned, we are searching for alternative solutions to the housing crisis. And I added also the word collective. So affordable, sustainable, collective, and future-proof. So very interesting. Our profession is now the #1 topic in the elections of tomorrow. I think that's also something special. I mean, I've never experienced that in my relatively short life that I'm allowed to vote. So it's very important. How can we help in this, and how can we, as architects, as urban designers, take a position in this societal debate? And kind of what you hear now in the public is we need to build, build, build. And every political program, this is kind of the singular approach. We need to build houses. And actually, we're not doing that enough. So every year, the amount that the ambition is not met. But also the construction industry is facing a lot of threats. So it's the land, it's the drink water shortage, it's the nitrogen crisis, it's the water quality crisis that's coming up. The power grid is full, so no matter what crisis comes first, it will for sure not speeden up the process. So for sure we cannot just continue to build, build, build. And also the carbon budget is gone. So if we would truly look at the carbon budget that we have left for housing, then the conclusion would be that we cannot build new anymore, that we have to use all of it if we want to stay in the agreement of Paris for reconstruction, just as a start. But also, we have a broken system, and we definitely need to change it. And I'll give one example, which is about home ownership. So this is the rise of the prices of houses, and it's already corrected with the inflation. So this is just the system that's not working anymore, because every affordable house, if we could make it to build an affordable house, in 5 years' time, it will not be affordable anymore. So we need to think about those kind of systems as well. And at this point, we think that the housing market is the main driver of inequality. So if you would have a group of children and half of them have rental parents, or this is not the correct terminology, but have parents that rent a house, and the other half has homeowner parents, then basically the ones that rent are 2-0 behind in life, because we created a system of insiders and outsiders. So just to start a bit on the negative side now, but just to say we need a different approach, and not just about numbers, but also about the system. And we think it's very well possible, but we have to think about multiple solutions. So what we did with the platform is we made an action agenda for housing, and I will now pick out something which relates to this topic. What we did is, for example, a research into can we make better use of existing row houses. And if we look at the action agenda, it has to do with number 1, which is we have to find homes before we build new ones. And also, if we add homes, let's do it within the neighborhoods. And these two things, so I think, or we think truly that within the neighborhoods, and if we listen to residents, we can solve this whole issue, and maybe even in a sustainable and affordable and collective way. So there is a huge power within the neighborhoods, and if you look at all the political programs, the notion to just go into the neighborhoods and see what you can do there, talk to residents, it's not written in the programs. So we studied neighborhoods with row houses from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Those were once all affordable, and almost everywhere they're not affordable anymore. So this is about 20% of the current stock, and about 42% of the current stock is a row house. And there are 2,460 neighborhoods with more than 300 of these houses over the entire Netherlands. They're in cities, they're in villages, they're in every province, so everywhere. And the interesting thing is they used to be very lively, because in 1970, on an average, 3.2 people would live in every home, and now it's only 2. So it's a decrease of about 30%. And of course, also due to upscaling, the amenities left, the bus stops left. So, and these are also the places where a lot of older people live, where there's a lot of loneliness. So there are a lot of challenges. And we think you can look at the housing challenge in 2 ways. You can see it as a new build assignment, but you can also think, how can we use it to face other challenges as well and create a win-win? So we looked into how can you share, split houses, and how can you do a small densification, which is a thing in the Netherlands we hardly have. Often it's large developments, 500 homes, etc. And we also say talk to people, go into the neighborhoods and ask them what their need is. And then you'll see that from conversations in different neighborhoods, we found out that about 10 or even 15% of the people, of older people, is interested to share their house or to split it because they want to prepare themselves for the future. They don't want to stay alone in those houses. And you can do it in many ways. So we made a catalog of how you can split your house. I'm going to quickly go through this because it's not about the house at this point. Because what we think is even more interesting is to talk about the neighborhood. Because to think about if there would be more residents, it can improve the neighborhood. So for example, it could improve greenery or it can improve the amenities. So we made a kind of catalog of pieces of neighborhoods. So this is, for example, a simple street with greenery in front. Also with the idea we don't want to go into a neighborhood with a full plan, but we kind of want residents to find pieces of the puzzle themselves and to see, hey, what pieces do we have, what pieces do we want? And we try to show with small densification you can achieve a lot. For example, these are the neighborhoods where many people say we would like to live smaller, but it's just not there. So densification makes a lot of sense in a neighborhood. Also, these are neighborhoods that are not fully built. The density is very low. You can also open up closed corners. You can even make side streets that are now maybe a bit dark, a bit closed off. You can open them up. So even on an urban level, you can improve the neighborhood. Also, for example, greenery that's facing backsides. By splitting or sharing houses, you could make backsides into fronts. Densification, this is a possible corner solution. And basically, this is the end image. This is what we believe, that if you go into the neighborhood, if you talk to people, you will find out that many people are open for changes. You can connect this to other challenges, the social challenge, the climate challenge. You can improve the neighborhoods, the mobility challenge. You can connect it. And then preferably, there's also a chapter on the finance part, so also do it preferably, for example, cooperative, but think about systems that are non-speculative, and maybe in the future you can even make those houses that all were once affordable, make them affordable again.
Thank you. I see some kind of things emerging, the importance of the neighborhood, the voice of the people. So these are things that I will definitely come back to. But first I want to give the floor to Nikki.
Yes. Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me here and very interesting insights so far. I had prepared for something different, but given the previous speakers, I'm going to change a little. I've worked a lot from my position and from my role as a researcher, but more as a transdisciplinary researcher, working together with citizens, citizen initiatives, and local governments mostly, into looking together for solutions and understanding different dimensions of problems when we talk about climate resilience in cities. What I have seen, and also now in the new research that we do in Mediterranean cities and regions, we see that often where collaboration and co-creation of solutions creating an equality and justice of voice and avoiding to have epistemological injustices with some voices, and that's normally the experts that take prominence and dominance. What we see working is when this happens in new institutional spaces. And that is where I have to say research projects and looking with a project view creates this institutional space for this dialogue to emerge, especially when there's a lot of issues of trust. And we see that a lot in cities in the Mediterranean, where the trust to the public sector is actually non-existent. that people are left alone to actually deal with a lot of climate vulnerability. And we talk about heat stress mainly, and a lot of vulnerability on health, livelihoods because of extreme heat and flash floods. We see that people try to take initiatives on their own, they self-organize, but of course that's not enough because they are left to their own means. And when someone is already impoverished and is already vulnerable, that is an extra challenging situation. So with the work we are doing and the work I have done also in post-industrial cities in the past, we see that when you create a space for these different interests, solutions, and ideas, and understandings of the problem to be actually negotiated, to create a dialogue, much more resilient solutions are being co-created. And to go beyond the vague situation, we are now working, for example, with the islands in the Aegean Sea, and with small communities there, like in the island of Sifnos, where you see the community together with the engineers. They are restructuring the creeks, they're not canals as we know them in the Netherlands, by reinventing ancient technologies, using material from the place, retraining the people of how this technology, this nature-based technology that was very familiar, that is from the local community, can be re-employed so as to create irrigation canals, flood protection, but also allow for nature, and especially in agricultural, difficult agricultural landscapes, to also be nurtured. So without coming with a top-down engineering solution that creates more troubles and also requires more and more investment for maintenance that the local community cannot afford. So that creates extra dependencies. It's more about building the skill, expertise, and rebuilding trust by designing and actually employing solutions that work for the place. Talking neighborhoods, there is a great diversity of neighborhoods also in cities. In some neighborhoods we have seen, I've worked a lot also with the city of Melbourne and with the metropolitan area of Melbourne, with the different cities. And even within the cities of Melbourne, you see some neighborhoods, citizens are very active. They're really stewards of their place. They offer solutions, and that creates a very different standpoint, a dialogue with local governments. But in other places, even with less vulnerabilities, especially socio-economic ones, there is great apathy from citizens. And the question I want to put on the table in closing my speech is, yes, we are seeing that co-designing, co-creating solutions, creating new understandings of the problems and how they are felt, especially when we talk about climate vulnerability and the climate crisis in cities, is very important. However, there is also a need to have for these processes to be complementary with the processes we have in planning, because not all citizens can actually co-create. We are asking too much, and maybe we are falling into the trap of the neoliberalization that retreats the state and asks too much of the citizens to fill in the gap. So we need to be also extra critical when we say, leave it for the citizens to fix it. Well, the state has a role to play as well. We should not kind of create this paradoxical caving into neoliberal thinking.
Okay, thank you very much. Very clear. And complementary to what was already said. So now I would like to give the floor to Anneloes, and I think you will take us to the more environmental questions as well.
Yes. So I'll wait for my slide, which should be coming up. And I'm really working in that sense from the urban design perspective. Yeah, that's where they're coming. And working on different projects where we also look at physical and system aspects of climate adaptation on both the national, regional, and local scale. And that really started with what was just said, that climate was managed a lot in the Netherlands from a top-down technical approach. I refer to that as makeability. If there's too much water, we drain it. If we need it, we bring it in again. And there we started looking at more system recovery, robust systems, maybe changing land use to really adapt to the kind of conditions of the water and soil system. And we did a lot of work for that, for the national government letter on water and soil as a steering principle, which is now in policy. But the question is then, if you look at the local skill, how do you actually do that? Here we see Schiedam with a low-lying public space that is often wet, swampy, muddy, but you can use urban upgrading projects to also really improve the climate adaptation. And there are already a lot of small-scale pilots, climate adaptation projects, greening projects, and we're also looking at getting the quantification with it. Because if we look at the numbers you need to capture sufficient rainwater, to store the rainwater of an urban development, we see that we get these kind of dimensions. So it's not about gardens, but it's really about the skill of huge parks or parts of polders that are needed to store sufficient rainwater. And in many designs, that's really different from when I was a student. Also the student designs, we already see a lot of green-blue measures, interventions, streets, public spaces, buildings. But it's not always that easy to also actually build that. For instance, the space underground is very limited. So it's also important to have a zoning strategy to make sure the cables and pipes underground allow for sufficient soil of a certain quality, the roots of trees, water storage and infiltration. And also what we see is that climate adaptation started from this approach that to me was a bit of a shot of hill. For instance, saying, let's take out the tiles everywhere. The more we get out, the better, which of course is true. But we also see areas like in the left photo where the groundwater is only a centimeter under the soil or even above it, and is then taking the tiles out the right investment. So we really see that need for a very strategic approach, seeing where is how much storage needed. And this is an example of the Rotterdam Weerwoord, where for every neighborhood we made climate maps that identify the climate challenge so that neighborhood initiatives or housing corporations can better incorporate that exact challenge into their plans. The same is very important for heat. We already see some strategic notions on that from, for instance, the World Health Organization that is prescribing distances to cool spaces, which is, of course, extra important for vulnerable groups such as kids or older people. And what we did in Rotterdam is that we also started to link that to the socioeconomic profiles of neighborhoods, because you do see, for instance, that neighborhoods with a lot of low-rent houses, these inhabitants are super vulnerable because their landlord will not adapt their house for them and they don't have the means to do it themselves. So in a strategy, you should better address and prioritize these type of areas. And in that sense, we see that we're not really taking climate that serious in the policies yet. This is an example of Singapore, a social housing project, where they, as a requirement, said that every house should be able to ventilate naturally from the front to the back, creating this complete open hallway system. I think here we're still building traditional and then trying to adapt a bit. We also see that in the policies. This is Katendrecht in Rotterdam, where we also made the climate adaptation strategy. And there we saw that there's a lot of new developments and people are not able to adapt because the spatial quality plan says that in the harbor you should build with glass and concrete, which of course is beautiful, but it doesn't cool your building. And we did an inquiry and we already see the air conditionings in these buildings going on in April, if you have one. So that means that most of the year the buildings need to be air conditioned and people are not allowed to take their own measures in these buildings. And in that sense, I think there's still a huge gap between the short-term initiatives that we see, which are many, but if we really look at the severity of climate change and what is needed to address it, I think it's too little to reach the goals. And the long-term goals we all agree on. But somehow in politics it's very difficult to get agreement on the painful measures that need to be made in between to mitigate or adapt sufficient. So we're stuck a bit with all the projects that are also kind of neighborhood-friendly, voter-friendly, and have this nice appearance. And it's super important to do that now, because whatever we build, hopefully will be there for 100 years or more. And now we're looking at new developments as if they will only be there for 30 years, because that's the economic lifespan. But we know that in reality, they will be there for 100 years. But we're not testing them yet against the climate scenarios over 100 years, but we're using 2050. So a lot of work to do.
Thank you. Thank you, Annelies, for pointing us to a perspective we should not forget, and that is the serious impact climate change will have on these neighborhoods and the livability of these neighborhoods. So I will for sure come back to that, but I first want to open the discussion with something that came through a lot of the things that were said by different people, and that is the kinds of knowledges that we value. You've really emphasized the importance of local knowledge. It also came up in what you were saying, Annelies. You pointed also to the importance of kind of having different processes, different kind of expertise. Also, the experts coming in, knowing how to split houses and so on. So I'm curious about your thoughts about if all these different kinds of knowledge are important. What kind of structure do we need to make sure this knowledge is heard and valued? Because now we are very much kind of governing our cities and our neighborhoods through a system where it is the classical expert, educated knowledge. I'm doing like this because I don't know how else to kind of challenge it. But yeah, do you have experiences, do you have ideas of how we can actually do that? Yeah.
I have one.
Yes.
In practical terms, we did at the district cooperatives that we not only facilitate work done by hands, but also with brains. So we looked at the local economy not only through the lens of facilitating, like doing the cleaning or gardening, but also looking at what is also present when we look at the knowledge that is present in the district. So one of the examples that we now, a service that we now have is consultancy. We have a consultancy agency, but on a cooperative basis. That means that the residents get paid for their knowledge, because the researchers often come to the districts and they will ask us as a district cooperative, can you bring 10 people with that are in poverty or have some difficulties with raising up children? And they will conduct their research, and residents don't see any report or don't have any say in the matter. And that's when we decided to say, well, we want to cooperate, but on our conditions, if we want to work with us. And first of all, the residents have to be paid, and there has to be a long-term relationship. We have to be also get influence on the research question. And if not, yeah, then you do your own research, but we will not work. So we try to value the expertise that's also already present in the district. And we, as a consultant, get paid the same as the resident. So we believe in radical equality, and that means radical in everything. So inside the cooperative, but also outside the cooperative, to combat the poverty, for instance, but also the wage gap. So
Wonderful. That is really great. I'm looking at the researchers here, so, and then I will come to you, Sanne. But I am curious how you react to that.
Yeah, I can tell something about it. Usually we have a combination of both expert sessions where we have different experts to really see what actually happens from different sites in a certain neighborhood. And of course, we also have the sessions with inhabitants, people who live in a neighborhood. And sometimes we're really shocked by how different the views are of the ongoing challenges. We had, for instance, neighborhoods where the experts thought that heat had recently been addressed because the housing corporation had kind of upgraded all the houses, and then we heard from the inhabitants that actually the heat challenge increased because there was this triple glazing that kept all the heat inside, and it was not possible to cool anymore. So we do very often have participation sessions where we have a look at what are the challenges, also what are the wishes. And also there we really see that it's so important to listen how also possible solutions are being perceived. What we, for instance, saw in Katendrecht, where we at first had a group that was a stakeholder group, as we call it, was not really mixed, and we saw a lot of wishes for green interventions, greening up the area, but these are of course the people who have the time to in the evening come to a stakeholder session. And when we did a broader stakeholder session, we found out that actually a lot of people were very worried about more green because there might be garbage in it, it could pollute a lot. So also really getting that correct stakeholder representation, as you also said, is also quite a big challenge in these projects.
Well, my experience comes a lot with working in a very transdisciplinary way, so like co-creating even the research question with citizens and also citizen organization groups. And I find it very challenging to also not just do this in a very transdisciplinary and collaborative way, but also remain critical and confronting own stereotypes. Because that's also what I find a lot. I mean, I'm referring to the research I'm doing in the last 2 years, but I'm informed from more years on that, that there are some persisting kind of stereotypes. For example, we found now in the research we are doing in the Mediterranean that a lot of local policymakers and planners, they consider community as a challenge. Because they say they always come with troubles, whatever we propose or we bring to the table, they say, yes, green space is going to be vandalized. And then we don't know what to do anymore. Like, okay, shall we make everything a parking space? That's also not a solution to deal with climate adaptation. At the same time, when we look on the citizens and interview the citizens and work with them, they say, we have no trust, our voice is only there to give a thumbs up, everything is laid out, and we are just the last piece of information that is missing in consultation processes. So actually our voice is not heard. So I find that you ask what type of structures we need. I think we need the institutional space to be able to have the dialogue, to go more in depth to what can we do, what are the current barriers and how to overcome them, while remain critical to maybe the stereotypes or entrenched path dependencies that they might be in place. And the role of experts is very important, and we need a new type of how we do the research, because research has a value, expertise has a value, but then we should not just bring it as a deal done to the citizens, to the governments. I think we need to also remain open and critical to our own research process to make it also more open to new questions.
Okay, thank you. I want to follow up on that, but first, Sanne, you also wanted to add an idea of what kind of structures could help.
Yeah, you could say many things about it. Maybe it starts with acknowledgement of often there are already many structures in a neighborhood. There are already residents that have a network and they are really powerful and strong. So it's often start with acknowledge those networks. Maybe it's also about, I love the word volkshuisvesting, which is always hard to translate because it's more than just public housing. It's also not just housing because it's also actually about resilient neighborhoods. But maybe we are, like in the Netherlands, it was gone for 10 years. Also, if you look at municipalities, aldermen, often it's an alderman of housing and building and not of volkshuisvesting anymore. So maybe we also need cultural changes. So maybe we also need new coalitions where a municipality, maybe their coalition is the residents and the neighborhood, and which is always scary, but so they are scared and go into the neighborhoods at the end of a process. But also for the corporation, the housing corporations, it's now the time to make a coalition with the residents. Because then also as a sector you stand much stronger. So we need this change within the mind of people who work for the government, work for the municipalities, but also for the corporations. And I think there it starts, and then maybe the structure is not so complicated because already it's more about this network and acknowledgement.
Nice, thank you very much. When I listen to all the things that you're saying, I'm just kind of thinking out loud now, but it makes me think of there is something like participatory budgeting. Has been around for a while. Some cities have experimented with it. For example, in Antwerp, it also works quite successfully, and it kind of really gives it shows that the community can also play an active role and decide on actually investments and choice. And it kind of made me think about what you said, Mustafa, because indeed, kind of going away from this very extractive approach to get ideas or kind of, okay, we have talked to the residents. No, actually show that you value the knowledge by actually also putting some budget next to it. It's just an idea, but it works in participatory budgeting for other things. Why not in these kind of collaborations?
Yeah, well, since you talk about participatory budgeting, we had a project some years ago with the city of Poznan, who actually did and was a pioneer on participatory budgeting. And when they wanted to put a program of greening the schoolyards as a way to actually have multiple co-benefits and an aspect of climate adaptation and an aspect of environmental education and climate literacy, and also of, building and empowering the communities of the schools and the neighborhoods. They, of course, did participatory budgeting because for them that was kind of a usual practice. But you should not look on this approach outside of its socio-political context, right? We talk about a city, and I'm advocating now for the city of Poznan, but that has quite of a tradition of also policies and administration that is really coming with opposing neoliberal policies, opposing financialization of public space, and looking on more of how can we do this with the community. So this also is kind of backgrounded by the political logic and also the institutional logic and knowledge behind. Jumping to a city and to an administration and a context of socioeconomic and political conditions that is not so attuned to such a measure is going to be a disaster. So you need also some institutional learning and institutional sifting. If you only think about return of investment of every inch of your space, because you really look with this logic, participatory budgeting can be just a nice thing to have, but not changing radically the system to think about new solutions. So the context matters, I think, as coming from the more social sciences is a message. But in this particular situation, we need to never look on the solution alone outside the context that it operates and makes it successful.
I very much follow that point. So for the Netherlands, there's still a long way to go to move into that direction. Yeah.
For sure. So there was a recent report also on participation by the Wetenschappelijke Raad voor Regeringsbeleid. And it stated that, so officially there's a law that says participation is obliged, but the form is free. So so they also say maybe it's also sometimes good to shift towards representation, because with participation, as Mustafa already said, you have and as you also mentioned, you have the people on board that have the time, that have the money to also do it for free, and you miss the groups, and those are not represented on the table that don't have that. And maybe it's also about timing. So when do you do this participation? Is it when the project is done, or when there's a plan? Or is it all the way, you never see it at the beginning, like in a neighborhood, okay, we just want to brainstorm. What do you think about your neighborhood? So it's also about timing.
Mustafa, you wanted to add something as well.
Yeah, a few things. First of all, we started this neighborhood union called Wijkbond. It's like just recently, a month ago, the first baby step to establish this neighborhood union, where this political education is a very important chapter of the neighborhood union, because we want to politicize everything. Because in the old days, a lot of things were politicized by what we called opbouwwerkers, social workers now. And we have forgotten that. So we try to solve individual problems. But individual problems are not individual problems, they are collective problems. Collective problems are a consequence of mostly ideology that has a certain policy in place. So that is what we're trying to do with the neighborhood union, to make people aware of that aspect and try to politicize everything. Then about the participation, indeed in that report of the Wetenschappelijke Raad voor Regeringsbeleid, I think it was called GRIP. Yeah. So it was about people having more influence on their own environment, housing environment, living environment. And what was so important, I think, about that report also is when people don't feel they have any grip on their own lives, they are more susceptible for disinformation, conspiracy theories, racism, discrimination. That's how important. That's what also we would try to explain to the housing corporations in Rotterdam after the demolition of the Tweebosbuurt, that people want to have a say in the whole process from the beginning. Not when already the decisions are made, then it's gone like being used as a check mark. No, from the beginning, when one of the board, of the directors of the board has an idea, that's the moment you invite the residents. And we try to convince them now. We have been talking for 3 years and finally came up with a compromise, but still the real participation, the genuine consultation is not put in place.
And I think in that sense it's super important to do it early on. I think it should be part of your analysis. If you start as a designer, because then you know what the challenges are. And it's still a lot of trial and error as well. Because sometimes you see that there are good intentions of doing participation, but it completely derails. So I saw a project where everyone from the neighborhood was allowed to make a suggestion, and then the neighborhood would vote on whose design would win, which immediately creates challenges between people in the neighborhood. But also interesting cases where we were actually working in quite a privileged neighborhood where a social program from the adjacent neighborhood had to land. And then when you have participation with the neighborhood, everyone is just saying, no, we don't want that. We want it to stay as it is. So also about who is included in that participation, and is it just the neighborhood, or is it part of the city, or is it also NGOs that represent ecology? I think we still have a lot of trial and error to go before we can really well include it in processes.
Can I give one small example? in this agreement that we have now between the municipality and the housing corporations and the tenants associations, in the beginning we said let residents choose their own architect, and was not allowed. So we try to fight for that residents can choose their own architect when there is a renovation or transformation or demolition in place, and that was not allowed. No, we choose, and yeah, the residents have.
Good point. I'll come back to that as well. But Nikki, you wanted to add something.
I just want to add something in terms of clarification also. That there are like two different things in place at the same time. We are talking about participation and representation, but also like who organizes and stewards the process, right? If we talk about the planning process of these neighborhoods that is organized and needs to be organized actually and held over a long time period, not just project-based, is really the local government's responsibility. So we need to also rethink the role of planners there, the role of planning itself. And in the School of Architecture here about the future professionals in planning, how they set up these processes of participation, of engaging, activating, co-creating with citizens, they need to go beyond the usual, right? Like they need to take what time it takes, avoid usual suspects or like professional participants. All these things we know well from research, but actually if it is democracy at work, right? This is the everyday life of a planner, not just to design in the office and make very beautiful master plans. This is an outcome, but the process is about engaging and being in the neighborhood. And the second aspect is us as researchers, our own positionality and our own scientific paradigm and epistemology that we follow, and how this also plays out a role. How do we intervene, how we create alternative spaces jointly with planning processes or in the absence and the void of them? Because I've seen both. I've seen cities that they have very well organized planning processes and the researchers create additional elements, you know, more refreshing critical views on it with participatory methodologies. And I've also worked in places that planning practically is just drawing maps and never speaking to a citizen ever. So there you fill in kind of a void, and it's much more difficult and challenging and of course academically interesting. So it's like two things. Who is organizing the process? Who is creating this space for activation?
Thank you. So it kind of comes back to this, how can we create institutional spaces where these different platforms, groups actually can talk to each other, basically, and how can there be some institutional learning, not only for the governmental organizations, but also maybe like the local structures and organizations to come to having these kind of joint decisions or trust in decisions that are being made. And that, before I open the floor for questions, would be my second point that I wanted to bring forward. And Mustafa, when you were saying like we were not allowed to choose our own architect, I think there is still a lot to work on these issues of trust in different directions. Trust towards the government, but also trust towards the communities and the local knowledge and the capabilities that people have, and believe in these active citizens that they can be there. Kind of also then there is apathy maybe, but there's also kind of interest in creating your own living environment. So I just want to reflect a bit more on that, because each of you somehow touched on that, but how can we increase this mutual relations of trust? Do you also have some good experiences or examples that you can share with us?
Who wants to start?
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, I'm also not. I don't have perfect examples. yeah, I think trust is just something you build by doing, and I think it's more about this different attitude. So I was at a beautiful conversation within a neighborhood which was organized by Actiegroep Oude Westen, and it was about the question whether people wanted to move to a different home if they would live very big, and if they want to move to a smaller house. And then the corporation was not there, and they almost all lived in corporation houses. But then later I heard that the corporation manager from the neighborhood said, yeah, but this is about policy, so I can come to a conversation, but then I cannot change anything, because then the people get angry at me, but I don't have anything to say about policy. So it's about, so the corporation needs to rethink their structure and rethink how can they connect policy to actually the people who are in the neighborhoods. So they're very practical things. Also, municipalities, we can talk in practice, it's very difficult because they have a lack of plan capacity. So they don't have the people to go into the neighborhoods. And so if there's a developer coming in with a plan for 1,000 houses, they're like, yeah, I have to put my people on that plan because that gives 1,000 homes, maybe after 10 years, but still they decide to put their capacity there, even if in the neighborhood. So what we're trying to do is also to prove that other story, to prove the social, also the social financial value. So if you work within the neighbors, it's also about money, because the budget of the municipality, like most of it goes to the social domain. So we also have to prove and rethink that system. And this is not, sorry, the answer you were.
No, I find it quite interesting that nobody immediately said, yes, I have a good example of how we can do this. So there's a lot of work still to do. Anneloes.
Yeah, and I think there's still a lot of work to do, and unfortunately also a lot of clumsiness involved in procedures. So what we see, we often work for a government or are commissioned by a government when we work in neighborhoods, and sometimes there's just a very clumsy process, or someone in the process is not aware of a project through another trajectory has already been approved, and then you're in this neighborhood session explaining that there's still decisions to be made, and then some people heard that's already not the case, for instance. And I think these things are very harmful, and also you have to be very clear about what you can actually do with the input or not. So that if ideas are being brought to the table, that doesn't always mean the money is there to actually do it, but that the idea of a session is, for instance, to be part of an analysis or get the input in, or calibrate the findings that came out of reports to see what is the challenge, what should be included. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the housing corporation that is there can immediately address that. And I think that transparency, and also being able to say, we just don't know this, but this is the stage we're in now, these are the following steps, is, I think, very important.
Yeah, I will offer another entry point to the answer, because we talk a lot about trust, and trust is something you build over time. It's not something that from one evening having a chat, then you trust each other. So it is about establishing a relationship and finding with who you speak and who can be your champion, especially institutionally, right? It's very important. It might not be the person who is higher up, because it might not, yeah, you need to find with who you work together, who can actually see the links to the different processes that happen, especially in a city, in the local government, for bringing some of these discussions that happened in a participatory way forward, and also can have, yeah, the courage. Most of the times it comes with understanding the institutional path dependencies, know how to navigate it, champion and advocate on new agendas, on transformative solutions. These are what, of course, from the theory, we call the policy entrepreneurs, right? These are the ones who could advocate and bring things forward and also create the conditions. These processes also take time. And that's why it starts with a relation, knowing and finding out the people who are equally frustrated by how slow and clumsy and short-term the solutions and the positions are, and can work together and take accountability without neglecting and also being transparent on the limitations also that are in place. And the same happens also with the community. We talk a lot about community as one unifying actor, that they all have the same opinion, that they all speak the same voice. That's not the case, right? So community also is a very diverse group of people with very different visions for the future, very different visions and also experiences of how they live in a specific place. So understanding this diversity, going into creating a process that finding and building these relationships is a way forward. And I can give some examples, but that's for later.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I totally agree. It's about relationships. And there's a saying in Dutch, vertrouwen komt te voet, gaat te paard. Translation, trust comes by foot and goes by horse. So, and we have seen that for the past decades, especially if you look at the elections on a municipality level, then in some districts in Rotterdam, not more than 20% show up. And in other districts in Rotterdam where they are more affluent, it's more than 80%. So there's a very big gap between especially the government, the local government, the municipality and its residents, and the other way around. And they are not wrong, the residents, because they are right to distrust the government, because the government has put in place a system where there is, for instance, in the tax authority, the Belastingdienst, institutional racism and institutional discrimination. They have been put in poverty because of the policies that were in place when people try to, how do you say that, application for compensation for rent and zorgverzekering in Dutch is healthcare insurance, and people had to pay back a lot of money, and they were discriminated, targeted. Black and brown people were targeted. Mostly black and brown people were targeted by the tax authority, and that's institutional. Not only tax authority. There is institutional racism in the housing market, in the labor market. The police has acknowledged that there is institutional racism in the police, and sexism also. So the people are right when they don't trust the government. So it's the role of the government to bridge the gap. But they are saying that for now, for 40 years already, but little has changed. Yeah. So you have to put policies in place that work for the people so they can start trusting the government.
I think I find it quite interesting, kind of what comes through is this kind of an institutional level of creating these kind of relations and trying to see how it can move beyond an individual or kind of, but that it kind of is sustainable in the longer term. That requires, I think, also a bit of rethinking of how this is organized. And I want to come back to that kind of when I try to wrap up. But first, I want to now give the floor to the audience, because I can imagine that you have some points that you want to point to, or you have some questions for our guests.
We don't bite.
Yes, hello, I'm Lidwien Spormans. I'm working in this institute, and I want to thank you all for your great contributions. I have a question, and that's about education. So we are here in an educational institute, and in our program yesterday morning, also in the festival, it was also on citizen engagement, and then it was also mentioned that architects and maybe also urban planners, I don't know, are not the best in asking users, residents, and for example, industrial design students are educated to do this way better and more integrated in their design processes. So I was wondering if you have some advice for us in this educational institute, how to teach our students to do better in the future.
Yes, I think so. Maybe, so I talked about this cultural change that needs to happen, but also that counts for designers. So not just the students, but also the people that already work in the field of architecture, urbanism. I think we should focus much more on our task as how can we contribute on societal matters. And I think that should be central. So not just about making fantastic buildings or making very interesting urban plans, but how can we contribute to society? And I think that could be much more encouraged in the studios. So often, I'm not here a lot, but I hear from people that study here that sometimes the studios are very theoretical and very, you know, far away assignments that you will never do, and maybe it's also good to, you know, do that one time, but how you should ground it to society as well. So this is about a critical attitude towards the educational program, like how can you do that better on whether it's architecture or urbanism. But yeah, if I hear some of the studios, I think, okay, maybe it can be a little bit more useful.
Yeah, and I also think compared to, for instance, industrial design, that in the Faculty of Architecture we were trained to think for people, where in industrial design they really include the wishes of people using it, test of people using it into the design process. So I think that asks for a designer that is also more a mediator than sometimes this prototype designer with a strong vision. And I think that is also very important in the trust and stakeholder processes. Often you get design variations that you then have decision-making on. I think it's also always very important to say how that decision-making process is being done, whether it's an alderman finally deciding or it's voting. But also that, for instance, all the design options are as strong. You shouldn't, as a designer, have one favorite option, make the rest a bit less strong or less feasible. So very often we see in the options that one is a bit without ambition, then one is in the middle, and one is with a lot of ambition but too expensive, so you know where you'll end up. And I think all the designs have to be equally strong, equally feasible, and really open for decision making. And sometimes I notice with students also this hesitance, especially the students that work in social challenging conditions, countries with a lot of challenges, to actually design for these countries. So they have this fear to intervene or to do something wrong. So that is a bit the opposite. So they're not the designer that says do this, but they're scared to act. And I think we should also be careful for that, to make different options that are each good and that we really believe that could improve neighborhoods. And the decision making is done well by stakeholders, aldermen.
Well, I think that's a very important question, especially now that we live in the era of artificial intelligence, right? That this is also something we can offer different, I think, as educators also, to our future generation professionals, especially architects, urban planners, designers, to teach them. And we try to do this in Utrecht, and we are still try to find the right way. What are the counter examples also? What are the failed examples that, okay, from a very traditional planning discipline, it might have all the amazing ideas on it, but it failed dramatically because nobody cared to ask the people. And I'm sure in architecture you can find a lot of those amazing failures as well, and use them for educational purposes. I mean, in the news I was reading about this super high skyscraper in New York that is moving, is swaying so much that then the residents are complaining about, you know, like cracks, water getting out of the showers when it is high wind and everything. And the architect firm said, it's designed perfectly to do this. It's like practically deal with it or leave. And it's apartments that they cost 1 to 2 million, you know, just to live there. So this is like one very nice, beautiful example of, okay, maybe you should have considered this building is for people. And use it with an educational purpose. How do you engage with that? What are good practices? Role playing. There's so much creativity in the architecture profession. I think it's also good to put it in place for training on how to also incorporate and engage with the users, the citizens, the people.
Anyone else? Yes.
Hello, hi. So what struck with me was the fact that I would openly admit that I'm one of those people who's like very scared to intervene because of how complex a place or situation is, and how much of a conviction I should have as a designer to then intervene in such a place. But then, yeah, in the past, I also came across some of the projects that we've been doing at this university where, you know, it was much later in the process that we were sort of prompted towards doing a participatory approach, whereas it was basically just sort of suggesting our design as one of the things that we want critique on from the people who are going to be subject of the design. So, so eventually, I think we came to the point where, sorry, I'm stretching this, but we came to the point where we realized that that's not really the way of participatory approach, that you sort of give them one option and then expect them to either be okay with it or not, or just sort of call it participatory or community engagement just because you came up with the design and you involved them. So I sort of, again, sorry for stretching this, but I wanted to try and understand your point of view on how to deal with such situations where, you know, you or your peers are in this process of participatory engagement, and you want to involve that in the process of designing as designers, but also you're scared to intervene because of multiple reasons.
Because of what?
Because of multiple reasons. I mean, it could be anything.
But maybe you gave the answer already yourself. So if you intervene with several options, you can always have a good conversation, because you can extract what people think about the different options, and you can also say it's not about the options, but use the options as debating material.
Yeah, and I also think as designers, I'm urban designers, we have to intervene. We're the professional that can do that. But we have to do that, of course, in a way that is inclusive and does improve the situation. But not intervening and having what we often call zero scenario, or having developers doing it without designers there, is not the solution. So I think as designers, we really have to take our place and intervene, but intervene as a mediator and not in the traditional process as I was trained here, but in a really different process. But I do think we should believe that we have to propose interventions that can really improve situations. I think that is an essential part of being an urban designer.
Maybe not only as a mediator, but also acknowledging that there is no level playing field, especially when it comes to urban renewal, transformation and demolition processes. the tenants don't have all the expertise, but the students have the expertise. And what I have learned from the past is that in the 70s and 80s and 90s, there were students were backing the tenants in Rotterdam during stadsvernieuwingsperiode, the Dutch word for, I think, urban renewal. So they had the students on their side, maybe not as a mediator exactly, but to have like a more level playing field, it's necessary that the designers can intervene in the process. So.
And just to give you a little bit of comfort, in any role you have in the participatory process, if you go as an expert, if you go as the one who convenes the group, as you go as a facilitator, as you go as a participant, you know, citizen yourself, is always scary, right? I mean, every participatory process is scary. Is you enter and you don't know how the dialogue is going to work out. So it's kind of overcoming the fear, because you find that it is important for your voice and your perspective to be in the room.
Yeah, it's also very hard. Like the last participatory project I was involved in, people were, at some point I showed 3 different models, and they all had a different narrative, and I said, this is not to choose, this is only as material to discuss. And then there were questions about it. And then some people were complaining, but what is this? We already see models and we're not that far. Or the next session, no models, but a lot of references, for example. But we don't see it. What? The same person. So this is, yeah. It's hard to work with people, but yeah. So you also need a bit of patience.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yes.
So hello, I'm actually in Caroline's course right now on social sustainability. And we're working on community participation processes in Thailand. And Nikki, I heard you say that, of course, you have this community and there's actually a lot of different voices, and they're not all thinking the same, obviously. And that's kind of what I'm struggling with right now. Like, how do you decide who is actually heard and who is not? Or how do you decide how these diverse voices come together in a process?
Well, I can say that this is how you also design in a way the way you engage and your methodology. I think it is very important to have a view of what are the different voices, what perspectives they bring, what is the histories that come with them. You know, like some of them, they might engage in this place, in this debate for quite some time. Some others might be new. And then is about understanding also the bigger institutional context. So it's not about choosing which voice to hear. I would say, as a researcher, of course, depending what you want to investigate, it's good to have quite of a grasp of this diversity of voices and interest in the community. Otherwise, you might find yourself later on like overrepresenting some aspects of the community versus others. So that's why all these transdisciplinary research trajectories, they take a lot of time. So I'm sorry to say you need to actually bear the pain.
You can also make sure that people talk to each other.
Yes.
And that they discuss among themselves, because often people have a strong opinion, but then when they hear their neighbor saying, but I disagree because of this and that, and yeah, that works very well, that you sometimes step out of the discussion yourself and let people amongst each other discuss what's the most important thing, for example.
And that question is the reason why we advocate for the opbouwwerker, so the social work. That was the traditional role of the opbouwwerker, to organize people, but also to organize them in a way where not only the most vocal people will be heard, but also the people that are not in the forefront. So that was the traditional role of the opbouwwerker. That's why we're advocating for bringing the opbouwwerker back to the city of Rotterdam. There are some municipalities that have them, still have them, and do a lot of good work. but in Rotterdam they have been cut back a long time ago.
Yeah, and I also think these communities' interest on different levels are so diverse that, once someone said to me, and I don't think this is a good closing remark, but you can't make everybody happy, you're not peanut butter. And, you know, it's about taking everything into consideration, but of course choices have to be made, and a project where everyone agrees, especially in participation, is very challenging. But you do take a broader view on what you include in your framework, both from the analysis, the solutions, as well as the decisions.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are going to wrap up, and I will try to do that, kind of bring together the points that have been made. And Evelyn, since you pointed to the case of Thailand, I want to start with a quote from a woman I very much look up to, Sumsuk Bunyabansha, who is the head of the Asian Coalition of Housing Rights. And one of the things that she says is, people are the solution. And that kind of also comes true to the things that you have been saying. But people are the solution, but relationships are very important. And trying to see how these relationships can move beyond the personal relation, but really become institutionalized somehow. From what I hear, there's an important role there for the governments to not kind of further put a burden on the communities, but actually really look at how you can do it, how we can do it together. So can we create or facilitate as at the municipal level, for example, these new institutional spaces, and then gradually build trust, look on how to build that trust, and address kind of power relations, but also if we are serious about the trust, show it also, and maybe give this community, through the new institutional spaces, decision power. Make sure there is a budget after there is some institutional learning and political learning in the communities of how to deal with, for example, decisions on budget. And look at what is already happening. I very much like the example of the neighborhood unions. There's already these kind of experiments happening. Learn from them, see how we can institutionalize them. And then I think that is only at that point when we might be able to move beyond these stereotypes that you were mentioning, Nikki. And I think we need to do this at the city level, but also at the neighborhood level. The neighborhood level is really, really an important kind of level where the links are made between the institutions, between the city and the residents. And I hope that with that I've summarized our interesting discussion of tonight. Thank you all very much. Javier, I don't know if you want to say, okay, we wrap up. Okay. Thank you all.